Mid-1943. A German U-boat sailor captured in the Atlantic is on a train crossing Virginia. He knows what a nation at war is supposed to look like: strict blackouts, scarcity, sacrifice. For years, Propaganda Minister Goebbels had assured him America was decadent, internally divided, and on the verge of collapse. But as night falls, he looks out the window and sees something that doesn't make sense. An endless river of light. Street lamps, farmhouses, entire towns glowing against the dark. This casual, almost arrogant display of power was a weapon he was unprepared for. And it was just the first shot in a psychological war that would challenge the beliefs of nearly 400,000 German prisoners. Their journey into the American heartland is a story pieced together from declassified reports, secret camp surveillance, and the prisoners' own hidden diaries. It reveals how the mundane reality of the home front became an unintentional psychological weapon. So how did a nation's everyday abundance prove more corrosive to an ideology than any deliberate propaganda? The answer begins with a crisis that American war planners never anticipated. That crisis exploded in May 1943. In the deserts of Tunisia, the German Afrika Korps and their Italian allies collapsed. It wasn't a trickle of surrenders, it was a flood. Over 275,000 Axis soldiers laid down their arms. For the Allies, it was a stunning victory that created an immediate, overwhelming problem. Great Britain, already strained to its limits, simply couldn't absorb them. The urgent request went to Washington. For the US Army's Provost Marshal General, the task was staggering. America had prepared to send its soldiers out, not to bring a hostile army in. They now had to build a network of over 500 camps, many from scratch. They had to feed, house and guard a population the size of Richmond, Virginia, all while adhering to the Geneva Convention's strict rules on humane treatment. It was a logistical and security nightmare on an unprecedented scale. And the men arriving were not broken. They were disciplined soldiers of the Wehrmacht, confident and steeped in years of propaganda. They had been taught they were a master race, and that America was a decadent, Mongol nation crippled by the Great Depression, on the verge of internal collapse. Their capture was merely a temporary detour. They fully expected to be shipped to a country that was visibly falling apart. The stage was set for a collision of realities. On one side, American officers scrambling to solve a massive physical problem. On the other, a captive army, sealed in a bubble of ideological certainty. The first American solution was straightforward. Disperse the prisoners. Move them by rail from the crowded East Coast ports to new camps deep in the nation's interior. This journey, a simple matter of logistics and security, would have a consequence no one had planned for. For days, the trains rolled west, turning a simple logistical move into a psychological siege. Through the windows, the prisoners saw a country that propaganda had insisted did not exist. There were no bomb craters, no visible signs of sacrifice. Instead, they witnessed endless, neatly cultivated farmland being worked by modern tractors. Highways were packed with civilian cars. One German officer wrote in a secret diary, "Is this a country at war?" At night, the evidence became overwhelming. The blaze of lights from cities and towns confirmed that the U-boat blockade, their supposed triumph, had failed. As the trains finally pulled into camps in Texas and Arizona, the initial shock gave way to a new question. Was this all a show? What reality awaited them behind a barbed wire? The reality waiting for them behind a wire was more disorienting than any propaganda. It began with the first meal. The Geneva Convention required that prisoners receive the same rations as the base personnel of the detaining power. For American soldiers, this meant a diet of astonishing abundance. For the German prisoners, it was an absurdity. They were given unlimited white bread, a luxury not seen in Germany for years. Real butter, not margarine. Generous portions of meat, sugar in their coffee, fresh milk. One prisoner, a former U-boat crewman, wrote in his diary, "Is it possible they are trying to poison us? For a country that is supposedly on the verge of starvation, they are feeding us unbelievably well." This wasn't a one-time welcome meal. This was the new daily reality. The first pillar of their worldview, that America was starving and weak crumbled not with a bang, but with the quiet, relentless delivery of the next meal tray. Soon, the prisoners were put to work. A nationwide labour shortage meant the US government authorised their use in non-war related industries, particularly agriculture. They were trucked from camps in places like Hearne, Texas, and Papago Park, Arizona, to work in cotton fields and on fruit farms. Here, they were no longer just looking through a window. They were now participants in the system that had shocked them. They operated modern farm equipment, witnessing firsthand the scale and efficiency of American agriculture. This wasn't a Potemkin village. This was the engine room of the nation's abundance. And they were now a small gear within it. For their labour, they were paid 80 cents a day in camp scrip. This money could be spent at the Post Exchange, or PX, the camp canteen. And what they found there was perhaps the most profound shock of all. Shelves were stocked with items that had long vanished from civilian life in Germany. Coca-Cola, Hershey's chocolate bars, Lucky Strike cigarettes, Life magazine. The ability to purchase these non-essential consumer goods was a powerful, unspoken statement. It demonstrated an economy so vast it could fight a two-front global war while still producing trivial pleasures for its enemies. The propaganda had insisted the American economy was a fragile house of cards. The Camp PX proved it was a fortress. This relentless wave of evidence created a deep, dangerous rift within the prisoner population. For many, initial arrogance had given way to confusion, then a quiet, gnawing disillusionment. But for the die-hard National Socialists, this was a spiritual test. They couldn't refute the evidence, so they attacked the men who were swayed by it. These hardliners formed a kind of Camp Gestapo, using intimidation, public shaming, and brutal beatings to enforce ideological purity. In some camps, they held secret kangaroo courts, condemning men whose faith was wavering. The psychological crisis was no longer just about belief. It had become a matter of life and death. The prisoners' experience of America was overwhelmingly one of power and plenty. But as they observed their guards and the nearby towns more closely, they began to notice a deep and troubling contradiction in this land of abundance. One that the Nazi hardliners would seize upon as proof of America's own moral weakness. This contradiction was the colour line. In the southern states especially, many of the camp guards were African-American soldiers. Yet the prisoners quickly observed a bizarre and unsettling inversion of power. On trips to nearby towns, German POWs, as white men, were often allowed into stores and movie theatre sections that were strictly off-limits to the very soldiers guarding them. For the Nazi hardliners, this was a gift. It was proof that America's material strength was built on a foundation of moral rot and hypocrisy. The ideological battle inside the wire was becoming dangerously volatile. The ideological battle turned lethal. With reports of secret kangaroo courts and even murders by Nazi enforcers, Washington was forced to intervene. The Provost Marshal General's office authorized a top-secret counterintelligence program. At clandestine facilities like Fort Hunt, Virginia, US intelligence began screening for anti-Nazi prisoners. These men were quietly separated and put through an intensive curriculum, given access to uncensored news from Germany and classes on democratic government. The goal was to forge a new leadership. But the most dangerous part of the plan was sending them back. A hidden war for Germany's soul began inside the wire. A battle of influence fought against the Camp Gestapo. Then the war in Europe ended. The time came for these hundreds of thousands of men to go home. The real test of this unprecedented psychological experiment was about to begin. That first accidental glimpse of reality from a train window had planted a seed. The secret re-education program was the deliberate cultivation of it. The men who returned to a Germany of rubble and ashes were not Americanized puppets, but many, especially the 4,000 graduates of the special programs, carried back a lived experience of a different way. Inoculated against totalitarian promises, they became mayors, journalists, and union leaders, key figures in rebuilding West Germany's democratic foundations. The unintentional psychological blow was formalized into a program that helped shape post-war Europe. The most effective weapon deployed against the Third Reich on American soil was not a bomb or a tank. It was a well-stocked grocery store, seen from the window of a passing train.